We are experiencing what many are calling a literacy crisis in the United States because adults and also children are at the worst rates of reading since we began to study them like in the 1990s, basically. And especially in the last 10 years, there's been a drop in reading comprehension among both children and adults. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about maybe ways to fix it.
I'm so happy you're talking about this topic. I was on a nonprofit grant review board that did early childhood education grants for 10 years, and literacy rates were like a major hurdle that we were giving grant money to try and overcome. And there's a statistic that says if it's third or fourth grade, if somebody reads at grade level by fourth grade, they will have a smooth career, academic career. It will be easier for them. They can focus on other things. If they do not read at grade level by third or fourth grade, it will most likely be a struggle. And I've got personal examples for kids that I've mentored for that as well. But that's kind of my first take on this. It is very important. And no wonder the adults are the issue today, because yesterday they were kids, and so if they weren't able to read, well, that's why you have this issue here. So and then you have standards where people graduate high school not even able to read, and so I'm excited to see what you're going to share here. But
I think this is the classic example of the idea of throwing money into the fire just to watch it burn. That's exactly what's happening. I did work as a substitute school teacher for junior high and high school for a while. Just recently within the past few years. And it is shocking how illiterate these children are. But the interesting thing is the school systems that I did that for clearly had money because they had all the technology. They had all the nice things. They had everything they wanted. The buildings were beautiful, perfect, clean. They had those smart boards, everything that they could possibly want, they had. And yet these kids still couldn't read.
Wow.
And so it's just an example of how throwing money at something does not work.
I'm going to get into both of those reasons, actually, once we get to the child literacy. Your point about fourth graders, Ryan, there's a scary statistic about fourth graders, because as you said, that's so important for them to be able to read at grade level at that point. And also, Doug, to your point, we have all this money, we've invested all this money in education, but somewhere along the way, we somehow forgot how to teach kids how to read. And that is actually true. We really did. And I'm going to get into that because it is shocking, but also there's some positive signs that we are changing and we are relearning how to teach kids how to read again. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, I'm going to focus on, I just thought this was so interesting. I was looking up these literacy stats, and I found that there's somebody that studies adult literacy. And so this is the program of the International Assessment of Adult Competencies. And they go out and they survey adults and they make them take this 2-hour-long test. I thought about taking it, but you can take it online if you want to. But I just didn't want to put the time into it. But part of it, it's not all just reading comprehension, but a good section of the test here is reading comprehension. So you see here literacy, numeracy, and adaptive problem solving is what they're measuring. And I just thought this was kind of interesting. So in 2023, which is the last time that they did this survey, it's almost like a consensus when they do it, 28% of U.S. adults assessed scored at or below the lowest English literacy level. So they have 5 levels of English literacy, technically 6, because they also say if you're below level 1, that's like 6 levels. So they're either at below level 1 or at level 1, and that's 28% of the adults. And that's a huge jump. This is in 2017, it was only 19%. We're at that point. So it was a massive jump there in just a few years. I did think it was kind of funny. At first, I was like, that means that almost 30% of the adults in the United States are illiterate and they can't read. But that's not actually what that means. So the literacy levels, even the lowest it's considered, if you're to be in the lowest level, you're considered functionally illiterate. And I've heard that described as their reading skills are low enough that it hurts their ability to navigate the world and accomplish day-to-day tasks. However, when you go and read the descriptions of, this is even like the below level 1 description here, it says, given a series of sentences that increase in complexity, they can tell if a sentence does not make sense, either in terms of plausibility in the real world or in terms of the internal logic of the sentence. I should have read the first one here. Most adults at below level 1 are able to process meaning at the sentence level. So at first you're like, wait, that sounds like it's literate, but it goes on to describe essentially that, they're very basic in how much they can actually pick out meaning, and it also really hurts their ability to handle any sort of complicated instructions. It would make it very difficult for you to work a job where that had any instructions or communication that was done in English.
So it's comprehension level. It's not just black or white, like can you read yes or no? It's
No.
like how well can you actually understand what it is you're reading,
Yes.
depending on the level that it is written at.
Yeah. So that makes the statistic a little bit better. It's not 30% of Americans literally cannot read any words at all, but their comprehension level is very, very poor when it comes to English. I just want to point out some of the stats that I thought was kind of interesting from that, like where we got worse from 2017 till now. And then, of course, we'll get into the child stuff, which I think is a little more important. But from 2017 to 2023, there was, you saw a 4% increase in the lowest level of literacy among whites, a 14% increase in the lowest level among blacks, and a 14% increase in the lowest level among Hispanics. There also was a 6% increase in native-born Americans and a 16% increase in non-native-born Americans. And so I do think, from a little bit of what I could tell and looking over this, there's a lot of information here, a lot of data, but specifically it seemed like, as far as adults went, groups that were already struggling with English just because of their education level or support they have at home or different things like that, like when they're like those kinds of groups they're already struggling. It just got even worse after 2017 to 2023. But also a large portion of this, especially you can see that with the 14% increase for Hispanics, a 14% increase into them being now in the lowest level. I think most of that could probably be caused by the massive amount of foreign-born population that we have now here that grew from 2010 to 2022. Which the data I found, census data, said we had a 15% increase from 2010 to 2022 in foreign-born immigrants, and 3.6% growth just from 22 to 2023. 14% of everyone living in the United States today, according to this test survey, were foreign-born, and that's jumped up. 14% were in 2017. That jumped up to 18% in 2023. So 14% in 2017, people born outside the United States living here, that jumps all the way up to 18%. So I think a lot of this increase actually just has to do with COVID, probably has something to do with it, and just the educational issues we have with the United States. But a lot of it, I think, actually is just immigration, because the more immigrants we have that don't come in speaking English, and then creating more communities that they're not really speaking English and they don't have a reason they have to speak English, you have more people that don't necessarily read English very well. Here are the grade scores. We've been doing this since this is the NAEP. It's usually called the Nation's Report Card. And they've been taking these tests since 1992. So we have the scores since 1992. And this is specifically the reading section. And you can see the scores have pretty much always stayed the same for the most part. It's a line. But they are right now at their lowest that they've ever been. For 12th graders, for 4th graders, for 8th graders, they are at their lowest than they've ever been since 1992. And you can see here, this middle one is actually the average. These are like the upper percentiles, 75th, 90th. These are the lower percentiles. But you can get enough of information just looking at this is the absolute average score. The average score starts to taper off and go down just right around 2013. That's where you start to see this issue popping up, and it goes down and it goes down, and it's gone down quite a bit since 2019 to 2024, which is the last time that they took this test. So this is, of course, the 12th grade level. The 4th grade level looks a little bit different. Their scores seem to taper off around somewhere around 2015, but still, it's it's within the same ballpark. I thought this was kind of interesting. You can see this down here, the increase here. Back in 1992. Only 20% of seniors were below what's called the NAEP basic. And so that is, they have the basic and they have proficient, or you can be above proficient. You should at least be at the basic level for reading, that's like the basic level you should be at for reading as a 12th grader. Only 20% were below back in 1992. We're up to 32% now today. And so obviously it's gotten worse. It's even worse for 4th graders, although the number started off a little bit worse for 4th graders as well. I think closer to like 30 or so. Right now, our trend is we're 40% of 4th graders are below basic. So that's back to your point, Ryan, about once you get to fourth grade, if you're struggling with reading, you're going to struggle with education. The rest of your educational journey is going to be so much more difficult. And we're at that point now. 40% of fourth graders are below the basic level of reading as a fourth grader. And so that's a little bit of the stats here. I'm going to jump into, I do want to ask y'all's opinions really fast here, but throwing out some of the things that people have stated. They've pointed to school shutdowns since COVID. So things have gotten worse since 2019. Absentee rates have also increased a little bit since 2019. However, from my research, that can't be the main cause. It can't be the only cause, that's for sure, because the rates were already dropping by 2013. Obviously, COVID made things worse for kids having to stay at home and missing school and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that I have stumbled upon two reasons that are actually more convincing to me than just COVID, since that happened later on after the rates were already dropping off. But what do you guys think is, just your initial thoughts? What do you think is probably the causes of this?
In general, I think it's just the lack of focus in the school system and the style of learning that they do. Like there's a way of reading that Abeka teaches that it's kind of like a phonics spiral learning thing, where you're learning how to sound out words and you're learning letter sounds, not just the name of the letter, but the letter sound. And then you're able to read those faster. And there's just no focus on that. There's focus on just like compliance and following orders and not getting the wrong answer. And it's not the right thing. Like there was a study from what's his name? It showed back in the 1960s. It showed that it was Dr. George Land's study, and they studied thousands of kids, and they found that 98% of 5-year-olds scored in the creative genius level. And as they got it higher in education and into adulthood, only 2% of adults scored at the creative genius level. And so then the question is, what's wrong with the education system that is killing the genius in 98% of these kids? And so, I think that's just kind of an issue. And then especially you bring in more technology and the focus on all that. And I mean, I think you just have a lack of focus on it. And then I can give a personal example of a kid that I mentioned, but yeah, I think that's kind of just in general what I would think would be leading to it.
Yeah, we'll save the personal example for a little bit. Doug, you have any thoughts before I jump into some of these teaching trends that Ryan's hinting at?
Yeah, I do. I have one, and I don't think this is going to be one of the factors that you came up with, but this is a little bit controversial. And as somebody who writes a lot, which I'm not like a published writer anymore, but I do enjoy a lot of fiction, I can say that the numbers that you just gave, all those stats line up a little bit too closely with the extreme boom of young adult novels. And while I am not condemning young adult novels, I need that to be clear, I am not necessarily a huge fan of them, because it is my belief that young adult novels have commercialized literature, and they have caused the comprehension levels of readers to go down because they are so simplified. They are formulaic, they are commercialized, and they do not challenge the reader. In fact, they are intentionally written so that people have to read, or not have to, they are intentionally written so that people desire to read levels below their comprehension level, because what it does is kind of like the junk food of literature. You get a dopamine hit from reading these formulaic stories, and you no longer wish to learn comprehension. You're not challenged anymore, and then the reading comprehension level goes down. And we saw that with like the Hunger Games and the Harry Potter series. That's all around this time frame when this started coming out, and we stopped reading books like Great Expectations and Mark Twain and all of that, and we started reading these instead for entertainment. And then what happened was those books got turned into movies, and we stopped reading them entirely.
I think you were actually really onto something here, and I'm going to hop into the main reason that I found, the main two reasons. And I think the first one actually connects pretty well to that. So I will show that connection once I get into that. So the first reason that I found, and these are the two main reasons from the research that I did for what is really causing the drop in literacy rates and why did we get worse. We went from knowing how to teach kids how to read and then having higher levels of comprehension. And you can look back like at the reading comprehension tests that kids used to have to take during like the early 1900s. And it's crazy. It literally is. It's just like, read The Great Expectations. And it's like, give me all the themes and tell me this and tell me that. And it's like fifth grade. It's literally it's sometimes it's stuff that's harder than like seniors are doing nowadays. It's crazy. So we really have dumbed down on what we think kids are capable of comprehending and challenging for reading comprehension. A lot of that began, from my research, happened in the 80s and the 90s, but it began to become more official policy that started hurting kids starting in the 2000s. And I have a reason for why it did not catch up until around 2013. That's my second reason. But first off, so this is the whole language approach to teaching people how to read. If you're not familiar with the whole language approach, what it is it moved away from phonics, which is what you were just describing, Ryan. Phonics is actually, I don't know how else to say it. Phonics is teaching somebody how to read. Phonics is like, here is the letters, here's the noises they make, here's the noises they make when you put them together.
And when you put them with other letters versus vowels or consonants and different sounds.
So phonics is teaching people how to read. And so the critics of the whole language movement are literally like, this is teaching kids how to not read. That's literally what you're doing, because you're not systematically walking through the process of actually teaching them how to read. Yeah. So this became popular in the 80s and the 90s. Educators started pushing it. And basically what it is, it's trying to, instead of teaching them systematically how to read through phonetics, it's trying to teach them how to read through immersion, or basically osmosis. And so to your point, Doug, what they do early on is they're basically like, we just want the kids to develop a love for reading. We want them to be reading as quickly as possible and right off the bat. And so they push young kids really hard to begin to just start reading and reading, books, and they want them to get interested in, young adult books and that kind of thing, whatever reading level they think they could possibly push on them. And it does actually lend itself to a little bit of that reading that you're talking about. Because they start out not knowing really how to read or how to have very good comprehension. It basically is teaching them to guess how to pronounce words or guess the meaning of words, because they're not systematically going through phonetics, they're not systematically going through vocabulary. So they have to do a lot of guessing at everything. And so their reading comprehension level is lower. But the whole thing is based off of just like, it's a little more of like a woo-woo immersion approach of like, well, we learn speaking by just through immersion. But the problem is speaking comes naturally to humans, reading does not.
And you're doing it all day long, hearing people talk.
Yes, right. But it doesn't, you could read a book all day long without having somebody taught you phonetics, and you still will not know how to pronounce the words that you're looking at.
Right.
And you can guess at what the meanings of words are, but unless somebody teaches you vocabulary, you still will not know what the real actual meaning is. And so this has been a massive issue.
It's insane to make
why
that
did this happen in the 2000s? Well, what happened was, this was actually pretty funny. The government did an official study, and they determined, actually, we do need to teach phonetics. This was becoming so popular. This was like educators would be like, we're moving this way. This is what we're doing. The government was like, okay, before you do this, we got to do a study. So they did a study, and they found, actually, no, we do need to teach phonetics to teach kids how to read. They still need phonetics. And so you would think that what they would do as the official approach would be like, let's throw this out. We're going to go back to just phonetics. But instead, they struck a bargain with the two groups that were warring over, educators that were warring over each other, and they came up with what's called a balanced approach. And so they're like, well, we'll do a little bit of immersion teaching, we'll do a little bit of whole language, we'll do a little bit of phonetics. But what that meant was it became the official norm, basically, to move away from phonetics, to teach it sort of sporadically and a little bit more sparsely, instead of actually systematically walking through them all of phonetics. But here's the thing that people found was that if a little bit of phonetic instruction, if you don't have it systematically taught to you, you can still learn how to read pretty well, as long as you have at-home support. As long as you have a parent who is also interested in getting you to learn how to read, you'll still learn how to read. But if not, then you won't. And also, if you're just one of those kids that's just like not naturally good or interested in reading, you're going to struggle more because you weren't taught all of the rules of phonetics to be able to actually, work through this thing and comprehend it. So you have that. Phonetics-based instruction is making a comeback now. Is starting to make a comeback. And here's actually part of the evidence that it really was, this was massively what started hurting kids. So in 2013, Mississippi was ranked 49th in fourth grade reading level scores, right at the bottom, right?
Wow.
And then in 2022, they during that 10 years, they jumped up to 20th. They jumped all the way up to the 20th, one of the better states in the country for fourth grade reading levels. And how did they do it? Well, they mandated phonetics or phonics be taught in their schools, systematic approach to phonetics. They also started resourcing the schools to try to catch students who were struggling reading in third grade and tried to catch them and intervene with them. Like you said, Ryan, they have to know how to read by fourth grade or else. And so they have one-on-one instruction and extra support for anyone struggling by third grade. But still to this day, only 15 states have mandated what's called the science of reading or phonetics to be systematically taught in their schools. And it's honestly something I think needs to be mandated because the whole language approach is somehow still popular enough that the balanced approach is still mainly like the law of the land. That's still mainly what's being taught in education. So unless your state comes out and we're like, no, we are absolutely focusing on phonetics, your kids are probably going to suffer. So that is whole language versus phonics.
The whole language, it sounds like that's just the lazy thing to do. And that's like, not that it's not difficult at all, but when it comes to trying to teach somebody how to read, teaching whole language model, like I applaud the intention behind that.
Sure.
Because it's great.
Yeah.
Like,
just trying to develop a love for reading for kids of like,
but it's not quite as hard to do as teaching phonetics. Phonetics is like strategic, like really detailed. You have to like go through it, line by line and learn it. And it's not easy.
I don't know if I would be so gracious with their intentions. I don't know the history of where this actually came from. If it was some education consultant, that just came up with this and then sold it, or they just kind of hid this garbage inside of emotional language and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that it didn't get the results should have shut it down day one. But we know from the education system that results is not what drives decisions in the education system in America. And so, just infuriating, to see that. That's especially when reading was so foundational to this nation. Like there was what's his name? There was a French diplomat and historian. His name was Alexis de Tocqueville, and he came to the U.S. in like the 1830s, I think, and they were so wondering how was the U.S. so successful so quickly. And like he published 2 volumes of this book, Democracy in America, and he concluded that because of widespread literacy and moral education, like basically people having self-governance, that was the 2 main things he found. And he said that high literacy rates among Americans, including even the roughneck pioneer with the Bible and Acts and a file of newspapers. And he said this was this unique phenomenon. And so it's insane, and but he said it wasn't just that, it was also moral education. I don't think I've really thought
about how core that is to American identity, how really core that is to American identity.
And it's being destroyed. Oh my goodness. Like it's infuriating because it's like you can only conclude that people who are making these decisions want somewhere up there, far enough up, they want the failure. They want the literacy to go down because it's easier to control a population, something like that. There has to be a desire behind this. The same thing with the education system. They wanted to create a nation of doers, not a nation of thinkers. And that's the design of the system.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because it makes me think about how early on in American history, there was enough interest in literature and classical literature that right off the bat, there was a question of what is going to be the first great American novel? Like what's going to set us apart from Europe and be like, can we have our own novelists? Can we have our own writers here in the United States? Like who's the great American poet? Who's the great American writers? And they would only have such an intensity for that of like, we need to find our own written identity because they had, like you said, the high levels of literacy, and that was really important to them. And that really, by contrast today, as Doug was talking about, and I've seen some videos and read some articles on this recently, but like the fantasy scene, especially the fictional scene, but especially like the fantasy scene is really degenerate and awful nowadays. Candy for the younger kids, it's like, it's candy and it's not, pushing their ability for reading comprehension. And then for adults, I mean, it's just I watched a video where somebody was complaining how the adult reading section for the fantasy genre used to be actual fantasy. And now it's just been taken over by erotica. And that's what it is. It's like you go to the fantasy section and you think you're going to read something like The Lord of the Rings, and then you crack it open and it's actually just pornography. And you're like, whoa, what the heck? And so they're like, this is so even though people are still reading a lot of books nowadays, doesn't necessarily mean they're getting enriched by the books that they're reading.
Yeah. And there's, if you look at like back in the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, it was the Bible. Like that is what they used to teach people how to read. And that is why they wanted everybody to know how to read, is because so that they could read the Bible and know God and live for Jesus. Like that is literally the reason. And that shaped the moral character. In fact, that's also empirically provable, because in 1962 and 1963 in the United States, they took the Bible out, the prayer and then the Bible, out of public education. That is the year they did it. And if you look at all the measures of a successful society, like literacy and divorce rates, crime, all these kind of homelessness, everything was improving or steady. And after 1962, 1963, every single one of them went the other direction, in the negative direction. And so, yeah, it's linked. So
yeah, absolutely linked. Shocking. Well, let me get to my last point here, because I do have to connect these together. As I said to you guys, it was year 2000 when the government began to take the official approach of, we'll do the balanced approach, make both camps happy, which ended up inadvertently putting phonics officially on the back burner. But again, from the articles that I read and people talking about this, they said, as long as you have a parent at home who cares about you learning how to read, you are still most likely going to learn how to read, even with phonics being put on the back burner. You'll still be able to be at least a somewhat competent reader. Well, then why did we not see a serious drop off until 2013 on literacy rates among children? Why did it take 13 years in order for you to see that curve and that you begin to see that massive drop off that we're experiencing now? Well, I believe, and I also asked a friend of mine who is a college professor who teaches English, and this was her take as well, that the main reason we're seeing as many drop in literacy levels among children, among young Americans, is that fewer parents are reading to their children out loud. And this would be the support that the children would have at home for, even if they're not getting phonics at their school. Essentially, if your parent is reading to you out loud from a young age, it makes you think of reading as a fun. It associates it with fun and love and caregiving, and you are more likely to actually have a natural interest in reading yourself and be motivated to learn how to read yourself, because you have a foundation of your parent reading with you. And so there are some direct correlations to that time period. 2012, 64%. This is a study that was done in UK, but usually the UK and US are pretty similar. So 2012, 64% of parents said that they regularly read to their 4-year-olds, those that had 4-year-olds at that time. 2022, this dropped to 41%. So it was over a 20% drop in parents from 2012. And again, where was the drop in literacy rates? It went from 2013 down to now, and beginning in 2012, we have this massive drop off of 64% all the way down to 41% of parents regularly reading to their 4-year-olds. And this also, we're seeing what's appearing to be a little bit of like a negative cycle, downward cycle that's occurring here, because we now, for the first time, have Gen Z parents who grew up on screens. The first time having parents who grew up on screens who more associate screens as fun and reading as like a chore. And so they're less likely to read to their kids, because screens are for when you're doing fun things and reading is for learning and sort of chores. And so since they're less likely to read to their kids, then of course their kids will be less likely to read to their kids. So if we don't do something about it, we do have a little bit of a downward cycle occurring. Now, of course, this can be helped with schools getting back in gear, actually teaching phonetics. But I think this is always going to be an issue, whether or not parents are doing this kind of support for their kids. And I don't know, it really stuck out to me. I was just like, wow, reading to your kids. I mean, I don't know. I don't have kids yet, but if I thought of all the things that I should do for my kids, I don't think I would have even thought of this as like the top of the list. But now it's honestly pretty close to the top of the list for me. Like one of the best things I could do for my kids is read out loud to them at a young age.
My 2 kids both love to read now. And actually they started out not really loving to read, but I read to them because I also love to read. I read to them their whole lives. Like I've read to them, like even up until recently, and they're pretty old, and I still read to them because it's just that important. And one of the pivotal moments for getting them to enjoy reading was, believe it or not, we sat down almost every night for a certain amount of time, I don't know how long, and I read to them a chapter or so of Great Expectations. Oh. Because it was too far advanced for them to read themselves at the time, but it was such a great story and it challenged them intellectually enough that that I think was the moment that it caused them to learn to love reading more, and they picked it up on their own. So I thought that was pretty cool, but I've read to them their whole lives, and it works eventually. Even if you have to fight, it still works.
I like your point about learning through play. Or that's the point I wanted to make, is like you need to enjoy it. And so that's even like kids helping pick up toys and kids doing things they're asked to do. Like if you make it playful, like you learn through play. So they learn better, they follow through on things. And if you do that with reading, but it's interesting this time frame you are talking about, because when I was doing those grant review applications, it was from 2010 to 2020. So it was literally in the
time that it was getting worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And we saw there was a huge need for this like after school reading, after school learning, all this kind of these different programs to help with mentoring and getting kids involved in that. And there was a correlation. They found a correlation in learning outcomes and the number of books in the home. And so what they started doing was just literally giving books to people, because like some homes would have like one book and others would have like 300 books. And so there was a correlation there. And so I have to give credit to my wife. We literally our son is 4 right now. He will be 5 soon, but he is literally 4, and she set the precedent and the standard of we will read to him. And so, it has been huge, and he'll go grab a book and he'll bring me 3 books and he'll want to read it. He just wants to do more of it. And every time I'm like, okay, we got to do more. Okay. But it's like, no, this is the best thing for him. And, but I want to say one other example is that, if somebody does have a child that is behind, it's not too late. It just takes work. So like there was a kid that I was mentoring. He's 10 years old. So that's really 4th grade, 5th grade. That's right there. And my wife gave me she's an educator, and she gave me all these ideas for this kid I was mentoring. And it's really, you just go and hang out and you can play basketball or do whatever and just spend time together. But we would read together, and he struggled. Like we had this level 1 reader books, and he just really struggled, and it was like really painful to go through it. But he was struggling in school as well, and all these kinds of things. And then, so I was like, you know what, I'm going to go. I talked to his mom, mentioned it, and whatever, we go on. I went a few months without saying anything. And then kind of later that summer, my wife said, hey, why don't you give him this book? And if he reads it, you can take him, if he reads all the way through, and, and he can practice and all this, and then you can take him to Chuck E. Cheese or this like play place that you go and do games and stuff. And so I gave it to him, and he read it straight through with no problems. I'm like, what happened? Like, this has only been like less than a year from when he was struggling. Well, I talked to his mom. Turns out she had sent him to an after-school reading program for like 4 months or something like that, or over the summer or something like that, and got him up to the grade level reading and passed it. And you know what? The issues in school went away. All kinds of other benefits. And now he was doing sports, and he was doing excellent and all those other things. And he didn't have to spend time trying to catch up in these other areas. And It was pretty much attributable to being able to read at his grade level. So it is critical. It's never too late to catch up. It just may take more work. And so I just give that encouragement for people.
That's incredible. Yeah, while you were talking, I literally just remembered and was thinking about, because I never thought about this as being educationally foundational for me. But my mom, growing up, she read the Bible out loud to us, the New King James Version Bible. Every single day, she would read some of the Old Testament, she would read some of Psalms and Proverbs, and she would read some of the New Testament. And I always thought of that as like foundational to my faith and my spirituality and my just knowing the Bible. I know the Bible pretty well because my mom, I read it through myself since then, but my mom read it to us all the way through a few times, right, throughout our childhood. But it just occurred to me now that this conversation, I was like, I bet that probably also had a lot to do with my educational foundation as well, because the Bible is not an easy thing for kids to learn. It's not like it's written for kids, but I'm sitting here listening to it at a very young age and beginning to learn how to comprehend it. And she probably, stopped to explain things to us when we were like very, very small. So it just stuck out to me. So thanks, Mom,